Whether it's torrents or streaming sites, the internet has made anime piracy unbelievably easy for almost 30 years now. But how did people sail the seven seas before the internet? See, all you had to do to watch anime was head down to your local anime club and get your hands on some bootleg, fan-subbed anime VHS tapes. But if you wanted to be the ones creating these tapes, you were going on a journey that required somebody physically in Japan to buy the anime, a $3,000 rig of specialized VCR equipment, and most importantly, a team of passionate fans willing to spend 5 hours just to subtitle a single episode. So come take a seat at the bar and I'll make us a Japanese cocktail with enough caffeine to get through the painstaking process of pirating anime before the internet. Today on Mixing Media. Right off the bat here, I think it's worth mentioning that these early anime pirates weren't taking any money away from the industry because they were the only ones actually bringing anime to America and basically taking on a full-time job to do it. So they probably would have wanted something with a little caffeine, like today's cocktail, The Other Side, that mixes matcha, sake, gin, and citrus juice into the most interesting boozy lemonade you ever had. But the citrus in here isn't just lemon, it's also got the juice from the Japanese yuzu citrus that tastes like a cross between a lime and an orange and can be pretty hard to find here in the States. Just like anime fans used to be back in the 70s, because there just wasn't that much anime on TV. Astro Boy had introduced America to anime back in 1963 and Speed Racer had become pretty popular, but it wasn't until 1979 that a show would come along and get people passionate enough about anime to create the fan clubs that would be the foundation of piracy. And that show was Star Blazers.
We're off to outer space, we're leaving Mother Earth.
Star Blazers was a space opera that followed the crew of the space battleship Yamato, which was actually the Japanese title of the show, as they fought to save the Earth from the aliens that threatened to destroy it. And I can't stress to you enough how much people loved this show. Now there were a few reasons for this, but the first was timing. With Star Wars having just taken America by storm a couple years before, sci-fi was more popular than ever. But Star Blazers also dared to do something that no anime aired here in America had ever done before: be Japanese. And that's because people were still kind of sensitive about the whole World War II thing, and Japan just wasn't on the best terms politically with the US. I get into all of this in my Dandadan episode if you're curious to learn more, but all you really need to know here is that to downplay its Japaneseness, early anime was heavily censored, names were westernized, and entire plotlines were just removed. They were hacked to pieces so badly that it makes even a 4Kids dub look like peak anime. Now, Star Blazers, by comparison, was only lightly filleted. Sure, the main character's name still got changed from Susumu to Derek Wildstar, but a lot of the other Japanese elements were left in, including a credit to Star Blazers' original creator, Leiji Matsumoto, and that's a pretty Japanese name, so people started putting these pieces together and going in search of more of these cool new Japanese cartoons. And this led them to their local anime clubs, if they had one. The fact that anime was an in-person hobby back then stopped probably about 95% of people from getting deeper into it. But if you were lucky enough to live in LA during the late 70s, you could have joined the very first anime club, the Cartoon and Fantasy Organization, or CFO. So this was started by Fred Patent, who is basically the founding father of American anime fandom. This man befriended the god of manga himself, Osamu Tezuka, and after being his personal tour guide around California, convinced him that there was actually an audience for anime in the West. And that was largely thanks to Fred. See, he had latched on to sci-fi conventions where the CFO would recruit new members by setting up screening rooms and letting that sweet, sweet space action of Star Blazers and Mobile Suit Gundam just speak for itself. And the action really was the main selling point, because many of the shows in these screenings weren't dubbed or subbed. The technology to add subtitles to a VHS tape wouldn't even become accessible until later in the 80s, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Instead, Fred would just give a quick explanation of what the show was about before the screening, and that was really all it took to get people hooked. Before long, the club had chapters all over the US, creating this nationwide, underground network of anime fans that made it a lot easier to get past the main roadblock to pirating anime: having anime to pirate. Back then, the only way to get anime was physically buying it in Japan, and the CFO made it a lot easier to find somebody who could do this. This was usually somebody's brother who was in the Navy and got stationed in Japan, or if you were really lucky, you knew someone who had the money to go to Japan and get it themselves. But whatever the case, you didn't want a VHS tape, you wanted Laserdisc. Now, in my episode on the rise and fall of the Tenchi Muyo franchise, I talked a bit about how Laserdisc helped fuel Japan's anime OVA, or original video animation, boom in the late 80s, but they never really caught on here in America, except for with early anime pirates, because Laserdisc offered quite a few distinct advantages. First and foremost, it had no piracy protection. But also, look at that cover art! It is beautiful, and Laserdisc often came with all sorts of little extras, including even little animated shorts. But on the more technical side, often for a lower price, Laserdisc offered better sound quality and image clarity. Though the best feature was that, unlike a VHS tape where quality would degrade each time you played it back, you could play back a Laserdisc as many times as you wanted, and it would look just as good as the day you got it. And this was really important for the next step: the unbelievably tedious process of creating the subtitles, where if you made a single mistake, you had to start all the way over from the beginning. Now, fan subtitling, better known as fansubbing, has a long and illustrious history that really could be its own episode entirely. So I guess if you'd like to see that, let me know down in the comments, and while you're down there, hit that like button. Personally, I'm quite fond of the 2010s era, where subtitles were just as much of an art form as the anime itself, and that honestly might be an understatement. But stuff like that was only possible because those subs were done on a computer. We've got to go all the way back to analog subtitles, when computers and video were two very separate worlds that would only come together with about $3,000 of equipment. Bear with me here, it's about to get a little technical. Also, big shout out to Retrobits, who has a fantastic video that goes really in depth on how this whole rig works. Definitely go check it out, because it was the only reason I was able to wrap my head around how analog subtitling worked. So I'm gonna give you the super abridged version of how he did it. The most expensive part of the rig was an Amiga Commodore computer, which at the time had better performance than a PC, and this was used to run JCOSub, a subtitling software that was actually created by an anime club. These people were out here creating software just to watch anime. Now that's a real weeb. Connected to the Amiga was the most important part of the rig, the Genlock. This little piece of hardware worked kind of like a hub. You would have your computer with the subtitles and the Laserdisc with the source anime connected as inputs. Then the Genlock would combine the inputs and overlay the subtitles onto the anime. Now all you had to do was connect a VCR to the Genlock's output and record the subtitled anime. Oh, if only it was that simple. See, the worst part of this whole process was that subtitles had to be manually timed as the show played. So you would be there just hitting the spacebar as the characters started talking, praying to God that you didn't get the timing wrong, because if you did, you were starting all the way over. With this whole rig essentially being a straight to VHS screen recorder, everything needed to happen in order in real time. So if you timed a line wrong 20 minutes into an episode, you had to redo all 20 minutes over again to fix it. All in all, fansubbing was a 3 to 5 hour process per episode if you were good. But once you had your master tape, it became a game of how many VCRs you could chain together to make copies before the show became just utterly unwatchable. This is because of what's called generational loss, which happens because VCRs can't perfectly copy video. So you lose a little quality every copy you get further from the source. Let me show you. Here's what a master tape would look like. Here's a 5th generation copy, and here's a 10th generation copy. And if you think it looks bad, here's what it sounds like. There were some people in the 80s watching anime like this. Let that sink in. So as you can probably tell by how complicated and time-consuming this whole process was, fansubbing was a group activity. And one of the most popular groups was Kodocha, named after the anime Kodomo no Omocha. Now, the reason they were so popular, according to former member and founder of Anime News Network Justin Savakis, was not just because they had high-quality fan subs, but also because those fan subs were on purple Barney VHS tapes. Apparently, the good folks over at Barney and Friends had canceled an order at the VHS tape manufacturer that Kodocha used. So they bought them up and became forever known as the fansubbers that used purple VHS tapes. And while their tapes were unique, they did share something in common with pretty much every other fansubber's tapes. They weren't for sale. In fact, the fansubber code of honor was by fans, for fans, not for sale or rent. So that meant all you had to do to get some pirated anime was just mail the fansubbers enough money to cover the price of the VHS tape and the return shipping. Because other than the occasional donation, the fansubbers were doing all of this for free, just like a mixing media. So check out my Patreon where you can give me a donation and get episodes early and even have your name in the credits. Now, as I was doing the research for this episode, I kept catching myself kind of romanticizing this bygone era of anime piracy, and I couldn't really put my finger on why that was, but I think I figured it out. You know, obviously the internet has made watching anime way more convenient, but I feel like the 80s and 90s were a real golden age for the anime community because of the inconvenience. You had to get involved in clubs and conventions if you wanted to keep up with anime. And whether you were requesting tapes from fansubbers, trading tapes with other fans, or rounding up a group to create your own fansubs, you were interacting with fans every step of the way. It was a real close-knit community. And frankly, it makes me a bit nostalgic for an era of anime fandom that I wasn't even alive for. An era of anime fandom built by piracy, and that's really the main reason any of us are here today. Without pirated fansubs to create a Western audience in the first place, there never would have been programming blocks like Toonami that got a whole generation of kids into anime. And there wouldn't have been legit anime licensing businesses opening in the West that only knew which shows to license by looking at which fansubs were popular. It was piracy that made anime as successful as it is today. Now, whether this is still true in an age where anime piracy sites are getting more traffic than Disney is a debate for another day. So with that, I'm Austin. Big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, and I'll see you here next time on Mixing Media. Bye-bye.